I held up the stamped county permits and Calvine's engineering reports, speaking in an even tone. "This is routine infrastructure work, carried out under state oversight," I told her. "The inspection and cleaning of the outlet system is standard procedure and fully documented, fully compliant." She stared at the paperwork, the reality dawning on her that her authority as HOA president meant nothing when it came to state-controlled water management. The irony was almost poetic, as she'd spent months scheming to control every inch of lake access without ever bothering to learn who actually had the power over the water itself. Sometimes the quietest person really does hold the strongest hand. Looking at the chaos she'd brought upon herself, I thought about what real power meant. She had taken my father's bridge without warning or discussion, assuming I was powerless. But she'd misjudged someone who understood systems, leverage, and where to apply pressure. The truth was, this wasn't about quick revenge, it was about having the patience to outmaneuver someone who thought they were untouchable. By the time the HOA board gathered for their emergency meeting, the atmosphere was already charged with anger and fear. News crews swarmed the clubhouse like vultures, eager to capture every tense exchange. Inside, the mood was thick and hostile. The very people who once championed Martha's marina vision were now turning on her, demanding answers about how their prized waterfront investments had been reduced to mud flats on the most important sales day of the year. The transformation from loyal supporters to an angry mob was swift and brutal. Martha tried to call the meeting to order, but her voice lacked the commanding tone she once wielded so easily. Homeowners cut her off mid-sentence, grilling her about why she hadn't known the dam maintenance schedule and why the HOA's lawyers hadn't stopped what they saw as an attack on their property values. From my seat in the back, I watched her shift from confident leader to the community's scapegoat. The financial tremors were already visible. Several high-value deals had collapsed within hours, banks were reassessing mortgage terms, and a few homeowners were already planning to sell before the bad press spread further. The community's image was disintegrating in real time, and everyone knew Martha had made the misstep that opened the door to this disaster. When she finally called on me to speak, the room went still. I stood slowly, settlement papers in hand. This was no longer just about property or money, this was the start of something much larger. Martha's downfall was unfolding right in front of me, and I held the final piece that would seal it. The dam work followed state regulations and was carried out with full environmental oversight, I said evenly, the weight of the room's attention pressing in. That said, I'm here to propose a resolution A1 that addresses the HOA's unlawful demolition of my father's bridge and the losses caused when you cut off my lake access without warning, discussion, or compensation. The implication landed hard. It wasn't just about maintenance anymore, it was about connecting her reckless decision to the disaster now gripping the community. My settlement offer left no room for negotiation. First, a recorded public apology admitting the HOA's unlawful destruction of my bridge and its abuse of authority. Second, $250,000 in damages to cover business disruption and property loss. Third, full funding for a new memorial bridge honoring my father's legacy and craftsmanship. Fourth, an agreed seasonal maintenance schedule granting me operational authority over lake water levels when infrastructure work was needed. And finally, mandatory disclosure on all future property listings, warning buyers that seasonal maintenance may temporarily alter water levels. That last clause visibly shook the room. It meant every property sale from this point forward would depend on my published maintenance schedule. Realtors would have to disclose that the lake had the crown jewel of their marketing could be drawn down at any time for infrastructure work. Martha's dream of a perfectly curated luxury enclave had been reduced to a legal note in a real estate contract. When HOA attorney Susan Mertz tried to chip away at the damages, the crowd had no interest in protecting legal budgets. Board members began distancing themselves from Martha entirely, some pointing out they hadn't even been told about the bridge demolition or its potential fallout. The solidarity that once backed her had collapsed. Then I delivered the revelation I'd been holding back during the low water maintenance. I'd completed construction of a private cargo ramp giving me unrestricted lake access, independent of the marina and entirely outside HOA control. The silence that followed was heavy. Martha's months-long effort to choke my business into her development had been meaningless. Her leverage had never existed. The political collapse was immediate. Homeowners demanded her resignation. Investors abandoned the marina project. The community she'd wanted to dominate now saw her as the architect of their financial decline. When the settlement was finally signed, it felt less like a deal and more like a surrender. With news cameras rolling, Martha scrawled her name on each page, her hand trembling. The public apology was recorded, and she accepted full financial responsibility for the damages and the bridge reconstruction. Outside, watching the lake slowly rise again, I understood this wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that systems matter and those who control them quietly often hold the real power. The memorial bridge would stand not just as a tribute to my father, but as a reminder that unchecked ambition can sink faster than a drained shoreline. And when anyone looked at a property listing, reading that seasonal maintenance disclosure, they'd remember the day Martha Crowley learned that control isn't about titles or votes. It's about understanding the machinery beneath it all. A month later, I stood on the finished Carter Sr. Memorial Bridge, watching the sunset ripple across the restored lake. Funded entirely by the HOA settlement, built to my father's standards, it was a quiet, unshakable victory. Calvin had been there every step of the way, and together we'd proven that patience, precision, and the right leverage could accomplish far more than force ever could. Calvin worked closely with skilled local artisans to replicate the precise, handcrafted joints and carefully chosen timber that had made the original bridge so distinctive, while incorporating modern engineering to ensure it would stand for generations. At its center, a polished brass plaque read, "Robert Carter Memorial Bridge, a built with precision, maintained with integrity, connecting past and future." It felt like the perfect summation of my father's values: a craftsmanship, durability, and purpose. The dedication ceremony drew nearly the entire neighborhood, including many who had once stood firmly in Martha's corner. But on this day, they weren't just honoring a bridge, they were celebrating the persistence it took to defend what was right. Mrs. Henderson, who lived only 2 houses away from Martha's mansion, gripped my hand and said, "I'm sorry we let it get this far, Daniel. Your father would be proud. We should have stood up for what was right instead of chasing inflated promises about property values." Similar sentiments echoed throughout the day as neighbors admitted that, even if my approach had been more dramatic than expected, justice had been served. Unlike the hollow political gestures of Martha's tenure, their support now felt genuine, earned by action rather than talk. Martha's downfall was absolute. Her arrogance had been her undoing, and her name had become a cautionary example of HOA overreach. The public apology video she'd been required to record went viral on social media and local forums, often accompanied by comments like, "This is what happens when power goes to someone's head, and never pick a fight with a business you don't understand." She was voted out of the HOA presidency in a landslide. Several board members resigned rather than face similar backlash. The new board replaced secrecy with transparency, publishing meeting minutes, holding open forums, and consulting residents before making big decisions. The marina project, Martha's pet development, died permanently as investors walked away and the community rejected any similar proposals. Her $7 million mansion lingered on the market for months, finally selling for just over $4 million, every listing prominently featuring the new legally required disclosure about seasonal dam maintenance and fluctuating water levels. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same property value argument she'd used to justify tearing down my bridge had destroyed her own investment. The wider community adjusted to a more realistic reality. Properties were marketed as lake-adjacent with managed water levels rather than exclusive waterfront estates. Values stabilized at about 20% below Martha's inflated projections, but buyers appreciated the honesty. My published maintenance schedule gave everyone predictability, and quarterly meetings allowed residents to plan their own activities around water level changes. What had begun as a bitter fight ended with a stronger, better-informed community. People now understood the limits of their HOA's power and the importance of respecting the systems and the people that kept their way of life possible. Martha's failed attempt at control had ironically delivered exactly what she'd claimed to want: a sustainable, transparent community. During the ceremony, Calvin arrived carrying detailed maintenance logs and engineering plans for both the memorial bridge and the dam operations. "Your father would have loved this," he said, pointing to the blend of Robert Carter's traditional joinery and modern water management. "You've built something that honors his memory and solves real problems for the whole community." As I stood on the bridge, now a permanent link between my property and the lake, I knew I had finished the project my father had started years ago. The fight had left the neighborhood wiser, united, and grounded in truth rather than illusions. When the crowd dispersed, I lingered on the bridge, watching the sunlight dance across water flowing exactly as it should. Martha had provided a master class in how not to wield authority. Her attempt to dominate had only proven that lasting solutions come from cooperation, respect, and transparency. The memorial bridge would outlive all of us, a monument to my father's skill and to the battle for what was right. For the first time, I felt I had truly honored his legacy, not just by building something with my hands, but by safeguarding the future of an entire community. The lake was finally in balance, and the lesson was clear: a real power isn't control, it's understanding. I'd never been the type to lose my temper, at least, not until now. The HOA, with their endless rules and self-righteous attitude, decided to destroy the last thing my father built before he passed away. They called it a safety hazard. What they didn't expect was that I'd take action that would cost them far more than they imagined. They thought they held all the control. They were wrong. What happened next? Let's just say their picture-perfect safe community didn't look so safe anymore. I pulled into my driveway, thinking it would be another ordinary day running Carter Marine Logistics, the water transport company my father had built from nothing over 3 decades. Instead, I found a crew of contractors, chainsaws buzzing, tearing apart the wooden bridge that connected my property to the main lake. This wasn't just any bridge. It was the one my father and I had spent 3 summers building together before cancer took him. Every joint had been measured and fitted by hand, each plank carefully chosen, every nail hammered in with the patience of a man teaching his son that some things are worth doing right the first time. Overseeing the demolition stood Martha Crowley, a blonde hair perfectly styled, clipboard in hand, her expression as smug as I'd seen at every home meeting for the past 2 years. She wore the look of someone convinced they were doing a noble service while making other people's lives miserable. When she saw me get out of my truck, she smiled. Not a warm smiley, more like the kind you'd give someone right before delivering terrible news. "Perfect timing, Daniel," she called, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "I wanted to be sure you understood what's happening here. We filed emergency permits over the weekend, citing structural concerns and negative community impact. Your bridge has been classified as unsafe and, frankly, an eyesore that lowers property values." The contractors didn't pause. Each grind of the chainsaw felt like an insult to my father's memory. I stood frozen, watching his last creation collapse into the water. The knot in my chest tightened with every piece that drifted away. This wasn't really about safety. Martha had been pushing her marina development plan for over a year, insisting we needed a centralized docking facility under her professional management. By destroying my bridge, she was cutting off my direct lake access and forcing me to rent space at her marina on her terms, at her rates. My father's bridge had been the one thing keeping my business free from her grip. "You'll have to rent dock space from us now, Daniel." "Market rates, of course," she said, her voice practically ringing with dollar signs. "We're already in discussions with investors who are thrilled about the profit potential. Once the marina's operational, you'll have access to far better facilities than this old structure ever offered." She gestured at the wreckage like she was doing me a favor. I bit back what I really wanted to say. Sometimes the smartest move is to let someone believe they've won. The money lost was bad enough without the bridge. I'd have to haul all equipment by truck to the public boat launch, adding hours to each job and making my services less competitive. But worse than the financial hit was watching the last tangible reminder of those summers with my father vanish into the lake. That evening, my friend Grant Holbrook, who works for the Port Authority, called and asked me to meet him at Murphy's Bar. Over a couple of beers, he told me something that suddenly made Martha's timing make perfect sense. The HOA had approached the previous dam owner months ago about a partnership but was turned down. Now, Granite Shore, Incorporated was selling the dam due to rising maintenance costs and environmental compliance issues. If Martha gets wind of the sale, she'll try to buy it, Grant warned. If she controls both the marina and the dam, she'll have complete power over water levels, docking rights, everything. She could dictate terms to every property owner on this lake. The more I thought about it, the more it clicked. This wasn't just about monopolizing commercial docking. Martha wanted to control the entire lake, turning a shared resource into her personal cash machine. Later, I walked down to where my father's bridge used to cross the narrow channel to the main lake. Bits of wood still floated in the current. I stood there, staring at the water rushing through the gap, and something shifted in my mind. I'd been fixated on the bridge, but the real power wasn't in the bridge, it was in the water beneath it. Whoever controlled the dam controlled the lake, the businesses, the people, everything. Grant's tip about the dam sale flipped a switch in me. I dove into research, locking myself in my office for days, digging for every detail I could find. I spent days buried in records and databases, each file adding another piece to the puzzle. People assume logistics is just moving cargo from one place to another, but the real art lies in understanding the entire system, how it functions, where the pressure points are, and who has the authority to pull the levers. Water management, I discovered, was no different. The advantage was that most folks ignore the paperwork until it's too late. Granite Shore, Incorporated had been running the dam for 15 years, but new environmental compliance rules had gutted their profits. The EPA's updated standards for discharge monitoring, habitat protection, and water quality meant what was once a simple operation of collecting fees from lakefront owners had become a full-scale regulatory headache requiring costly equipment and certified experts. Their liquidation filings showed they were staring down over $200,000 in immediate upgrades just to stay compliant. The real turning point came when I reached out to Calvin Ross, an independent dam engineer who specialized in helping operators meet compliance standards. I posed as a business owner seeking advice about water management for my marine transport company. Calvin was the type who loved explaining complicated technical matters to anyone willing to listen, and I made sure to listen carefully. He explained that dam operators hold significant and perfectly legal control over water levels, provided they file the proper notices and follow environmental protocols. Most people don't realize how much discretion an operator actually has, he said, flipping through a manual I could almost hear over the phone. It all comes down to documentation and timing. If you're conducting authorized maintenance with public notice, you can adjust water levels quite a bit. It's really just paperwork. His words stuck with me. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was the power to influence an entire community's future. It was thrilling and a little unsettling. Forming the company to purchase the dam turned out to be surprisingly easy. I set up Carter Water Management LLC, leaving my name out of the public filings while keeping full control behind the scenes. Granite Shore wanted out fast to dodge the looming compliance deadlines, so they were open to negotiation. Before long, I owned the structure that regulated water flow for every property on Mirror Lake, including Martha Crowley's multi-million-dollar mansion. While I was finalizing the purchase, Martha's legal team was stepping up their pressure. I received a letter from attorney Susan Mertz that was practically dripping with hostility. It threatened legal action if I didn't remove my equipment, accusing me of trespassing and operating without authorization. When I called to discuss it, I asked if she was certain they wanted to take a hard stance on water rights. Her confidence wavered instantly. I hinted that the home might not have fully researched the regulatory landscape before making threats. She ended the call saying she'd need to check with her colleagues. When Calvin inspected the dam in person, he confirmed it needed real work, especially on the bottom outlet system that controls seasonal lake levels. The timing, as it happened, was perfect. Maintenance is normally done in summer, and by law it only requires 72 hours notice to county officials. The work would be fully documented, state-approved, and in line with environmental rules. And yet a broken bar. That maintenance window lined up exactly with the date of Martha's big investor showcase. Her event was designed to sell prime waterfront properties with postcard-perfect lake views. Multiple high-value sales hinged on flawless conditions, and her marketing team had even scheduled professional photography for the perfect morning light. Calvin confirmed that if I filed my maintenance notice 72 hours before the event, the approval would be automatic. I'd have the legal authority to lower water levels for equipment access. within environmental limits, but the sight of receding shorelines and grounded boats would speak louder than any sales pitch. Studying Calvin's diagrams late into the night, I realized this wasn't just maintenance. It was the blueprint for complete control. Martha's showcase could transform from a luxury waterfront tour into a walk around muddy flats. Officially, it would be business as usual. Unofficially, it would be the most satisfying turn of the tables I'd ever pulled off. I told myself it was simply good operational planning and that the dam needed repairs anyway. But staring at those diagrams, knowing exactly how perfectly the timing would sabotage her event, I understood I was venturing into a different territory. This was no longer just about keeping my business afloat. This was about payback, and the only question left was whether I was willing to pull the trigger. I knew I was at a crossroads, but I hadn't yet decided how far I was willing to go. The monthly home meeting was packed, a standing room only inside the clubhouse, with more than 200 people watching the live stream. Martha thrived in that environment, radiating the confidence of someone who believed she was in total control. The moment I walked in, I felt the stare as a cool, measuring like I was the target in a room full of hunters. Looking back, I should have realized she had something bigger planned than a routine community update. She opened the meeting with the calculated warmth of a politician about to deliver bad news. "Before we move to regular business," she began, "I want to address the unfortunate situation with the bridge demolition." Her tone dripped with practiced sympathy as she gestured toward me, presenting me to the room like I was on trial. I kept my face unreadable while mentally noting every word. She was weaving a narrative, and I was the villain in her story. Daniel Carter has been operating a commercial logistics business from his residential property without proper community oversight, she declared, her voice gaining strength. His wooden bridge not only violated multiple safety and building codes, it gave him an unfair competitive advantage that undermines our community's standards. She made it sound like I'd been running an underground operation instead of continuing the water transport business my father had legally operated for decades. Some of the homeowners nodded along, proof she'd been spreading her version of events well before this meeting. Then came the real performance. The lights dimmed, and a massive presentation screen lit up with glossy renderings and detailed projections. Martha unveiled her grand vision, a high-end marina boasting 40 premium slips, a clubhouse with a restaurant, and what she described as managed water access for all commercial activity. The catch? Home management fees would jump by 40% after construction, plus every waterfront owner would face a new annual fee for marina upkeep. I watched as excitement shifted to unease in the crowd. The property value gains were appealing, but the financial weight wasn't. Martha's voice softened, as though she were offering a gift. "This marina will establish us as the premier waterfront community in the region. Property values could rise 15 to 20%, more than covering the initial investment." Some people looked intrigued. Others seemed to be calculating whether they could afford it. She was essentially asking them to bankroll her personal development empire, dressing it up as a community benefit. Then she dropped the detail that tied everything together. With almost relevant pride, she announced an exclusive investor showcase scheduled for July 14th. Guided tours of luxury waterfront homes, complete with professional photography and aerial drone footage at the perfect morning light. Several multi-million-dollar deals hinged on that day going flawlessly, especially the imagery showing clear waters and pristine shorelines. She made it sound as if the community's entire financial future depended on this one event. The guest list included developers, investment firms, and wealthy buyers seeking elite waterfront estates. The 5 featured properties ranged from $6 to $8 million. Each a carefully staged showpiece. When someone asked about environmental impacts, Martha answered smoothly, revealing she'd already ordered environmental studies, secured preliminary permits, and lined up specialized contractors. But what caught my ear most was her offhand mention of working with regional water management authorities to ensure optimal lake conditions for both construction and long-term operation. She wasn't just building a marina, she was aiming to control the lake itself. When the meeting adjourned, she made a point of approaching me while others were still nearby. Her smile had a predator's patience. "I hope you understand this isn't personal, Daniel. It's business. Once the marina is complete, You'll have access to far better facilities than your old bridge. You might even find working within our system more profitable than going it alone." Her tone left no doubt it wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum wrapped in polite language. I told her I'd consider my options, just to give her the satisfaction of thinking she'd won that round. As I walked to my truck, I overheard fragments of conversation in the parking lot. Some were already dreaming about rising property values, others worried they'd signed on to more than they could handle. What stood out most was how seamlessly Martha had positioned herself as the architect of the community's future, the one everyone would have to rely on if they wanted to be part of it. Martha had made herself the single point of access, the gatekeeper to the community's economic future. It was impressive, in a cold, unsettling way. Suddenly, her confidence in tearing down my bridge made perfect sense. This had never been about a single structure. She wanted control over everything at the lake, the land, and everyone who lived around it, and I wasn't about to let her take it. The county clerk's office opened first thing in the morning, and I was waiting in the parking lot with my documents before the doors were even unlocked. I'd spent the weekend combing through every page, checking each signature like my life depended on it. One mistake could derail the entire plan. Calvin had walked me through the filing requirements more than once, reminding me how seriously environmental agencies scrutinized these submissions. If the paperwork was off, approval could be delayed for weeks, and timing was everything. My maintenance notice had to be submitted exactly 72 hours before July 14th. This day was my one and only shot. Patricia, the clerk handling my file, was meticulous. She flipped through each page, reading aloud portions of Calvin's engineering reports and environmental assessments. Water level adjustment for infrastructure maintenance. See a broken bar bottom outlet system inspection and cleaning a broken bar authorized under Section 427.6 of the State Water Management Code. To her, it was just another routine filing, but to me, it was a lever that could shift the balance of power on the entire lake. Calvin's documentation was airtight. He'd included detailed water quality monitoring plans, wildlife protection protocols, and contingency procedures for emergency refilling if conditions changed. The technical specifications alone ran a dozen pages and demonstrated full compliance with both state and federal regulations. Patricia nodded approvingly as she checked items off her list, occasionally asking questions about equipment and inspection schedules. By the time she stamped the approval and slid a copy across the counter, the operation was officially scheduled. The notice would go on the county's website and be distributed to environmental agencies. "You're all set for maintenance starting July 14th, she said. I thanked her, wondering if she had any idea what those routine operations would do to Martha's showcase. Driving back to my office, I thought about what I had just set in motion. Legally, it was flawless. Calvin's report identified genuine issues, and the work would follow industry standards under full oversight. But the optics? Martha's picture-perfect waterfront event was about to feature empty shorelines and beached boats. Every photographer she'd hired would be documenting the disaster instead of selling her dream. I told myself it was strictly business, but a small voice in my head reminded me this was edging into something else entirely. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Susan Mertz, and she sounded like she was fighting to stay calm. Someone had tipped her off about my filing, and she didn't like what she found. "Mr. Carter, I need to understand exactly what you think you are doing with this damn maintenance schedule," she demanded, her voice straining to sound authoritative. I told her plainly that I was performing routine infrastructure maintenance in accordance with state regulations. That's when she demanded to know why the schedule lined up perfectly with the HOA's investor showcase. The irony was almost funny. She was essentially asking me to postpone required maintenance just so Martha's event could go smoothly. Predictably, she threatened to seek an emergency injunction, accusing me of intentionally interfering with legitimate business. I asked her what legal grounds she had for stopping an authorized maintenance operation. That's when the confidence in her voice began to fade. It was clear she hadn't dug into the regulatory framework as deeply as she thought. HOA rules don't override state water management law. She ended the call saying she'd consult with environmental attorneys before getting back to me, more retreat than threat. What she didn't realize was that Calvin's work had made my documentation untouchable. Every box was checked, every safety measure in place, every legal standard met, and the repairs were genuinely necessary. The bottom outlet system hadn't been serviced in years, and some parts were already showing wear that could lead to real problems if ignored. From a liability perspective, delaying the work would have been far riskier than proceeding exactly as scheduled. Any lawyer attempting to block the operation would be arguing that an HOA's convenience should outweigh critical infrastructure safety, an argument that wouldn't survive long in court. Then Calvin called with unsettling news he'd picked up from colleagues. Martha had approached 3 separate dam engineering firms, inquiring about acquisition procedures and the regulatory oversight involved. She was actively maneuvering to purchase the dam, likely intending to finalize the deal after her investor event generated enough capital. If she controlled both the marina project and dam operations, she'd essentially have unchecked authority over lake access and water management. The idea of her holding that much power made my actions feel less like retaliation and more like protection. That night, I drove out to the dam facility with my new access codes in hand. Inside, I inspected the massive steel valves Calvin had described, a precision machinery capable of draining the entire lake in under a day at full capacity. Sensors monitored water quality, flow rates, and wildlife impact in real time, ready to trigger alerts at the slightest deviation. Everything was designed for legitimate maintenance, yet the visual effect it would create was unavoidable. Standing there in the control room, I realized I was holding the keys to Martha's empire. The paperwork was in place, but a heavy awareness lingered as this was no longer just business, it was personal. When the maintenance operation began, the environmental systems confirmed optimal conditions. Calvin reviewed each step with me, leaving no room for hesitation. His radio crackled with updates from county oversight as we followed the approved plan exactly. Every action was logged, a wildlife displacement tracked, water quality readings verified, cameras documenting each stage. By the book, flawless. But the schedule was no accident. Martha's grand investor showcase was built around presenting untouched waterfront views, with multiple multi-million-dollar deals hinging on those images. The timing of my filing ensured our work would overlap perfectly with her most critical day. As the hours passed, the lake's waterline dropped. At first, only a subtle shift was visible. Then docks sat awkwardly above the exposed ground, yachts listing against their moorings, and the once pristine shoreline gave way to ugly stretches of mud. The transformation was accelerating, and I found myself glancing at my watch, calculating exactly how much worse it would look before her event began. By the time I visited the lakefront to witness the outcome firsthand, the scene was a disaster. Investors arrived expecting sweeping, glistening water views but were greeted by a barren expanse of cracked mud and stranded boats. Conversations turned sharp, phones came out for pictures, and several groups left before Martha could finish her explanations. One developer didn't bother softening his words. "Call me when you've sorted your water problem," he said before walking away without another glance. Others soon followed, luxury cars disappearing in a haze of dust. I stayed back in my truck, watching the unraveling of the image she'd worked so hard to project. A cold sense of satisfaction washed over me as I watched her empire crumble, though an irritating flicker of doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Martha's grand showcase was unraveling right in front of her, the polished facade collapsing faster than anyone could have imagined. Reporters descended almost instantly, filming baffled residents as they stood beside stranded boats, trying to comprehend how their multi-million-dollar waterfront properties had turned into barren stretches of mud overnight. One man, his voice tight with outrage, held up a phone showing a video of his yacht tilted awkwardly in the exposed lake bed. "I paid $3 million for this view," he told the camera, disbelief cutting through every word, "and now it looks like a construction zone." The reporter nodded, capturing the perfect soundbite for what was clearly going to be a damning news piece about the collapse of a luxury dream. The fallout spread faster than I expected. Agents were frantically canceling property tours, telling clients they'd revisit once the water returns. Listing sites began quietly swapping out their flowery pristine waterfront descriptions for softer phrases like lake adjacent and conditions may vary. It was the politest possible way of saying the place looked like a disaster zone. The community's prestige, carefully built over years, was evaporating just as fast as the water. Martha stormed into the facility, Fury etched into every line of her face. Her perfect hair was in disarray, her once impeccable suit now creased and tired-looking. "You've destroyed everything," she spat, her voice trembling somewhere between rage and panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "The investors," the marina projected on,